JH asks, hello, Dr. Wong. Thank you for doing this. It's progressive and much appreciated, to say the least. I have two questions. I had FOV and a membrane peel that were successful. My vitreous had unwound so that I had a PVD, fortunately, that was like a walking sticking floating in my eye. The only after effect is I have a vitreous remnant floater that is comparable to the thin teardrop of gray/glue. At first, it blocked letters, etc., but is less noticeable now. It was described as approximately 5 meters long and narrow. Should I leave it alone? I visit my surgeon a couple of weeks, and he said we'd reassess then. Is it possible that what I'm seeing has to do more with the membrane peel than a floater, since it's not dark brown and more noticeable towards the bottom center of my macula? I see 20/20 clearly with my left. I had RD with scleral buckle in 1997. My second question is, I had multiple RDs, 4 in the right eye in 2013 and 14, and ultimately was repaired with silicone oil. Okay, so, and then there's some complications with the silicone oil. I'm wondering if it's feasible to remove all the silicone oil. Do you ever go back just to remove silicone remnants? Thank you so much. I know I'm a complicated case. I had cataract surgery last summer on both eyes, and I'm 20 better in the left, 20/30 in the right. Okay. Wow. Let me answer your first question, is that I just can't tell by your description whether or not the floater is related to the membrane peel or not. I would say that it doesn't matter if it's something that's in your vision that's moving back and forth, as we described in the lecture, then I think it's something that you can have a discussion with your surgeon as to whether or not he or she would like to go back and remove that. This may be further complicated because you have the pressure of having had a retinal detachment in the other eye. As far as the other eye is concerned, many times, especially when the visual potential is good, as in your case, silicone oil is a temporary measure to keep the retina attached, with the anticipation that the silicone oil will be removed at a later date. On occasion, not all the silicone oil is removed. Sometimes it's very difficult, and on occasion we have to go back in and remove that little bit of silicone oil. I hope I got that question right. AR asks, why do you induce PVD when others do not? I feel that my experience in this area is probably greater than anybody else's. If you look at one of my webinars about 2 years ago, I went out there and said, I don't think inducing a PVD is necessary. Now in 2015, I think I was wrong in saying that. And the reason is that my concern is with the young patients who have difficulties with the floaters, who may get frill. It's been my observation that there is an obsession with the floaters, and in those patients, having had something called frill developed afterwards, although the floaters are gone, the obsession is now focused on the frill. So the shorter answer is, I believe that we get a better result, or we reduce the development of frill in the younger patients if we induce a PVD. And I think my frill rate, however we define that, has really dropped dramatically over the last couple of years because of creating a PVD. Again, the PVD allows me to remove more of the vitreous more safely and more efficiently. And to put it another way, I can really go off to the sides of the eye and remove that vitreous, which is the vitreous that causes frill. MB, thank you for your email last night. I had a feeling you were going to be present today, so I didn't answer all your questions via email. Why do so many doctors not recommend vitrectomy for people with troublesome floaters? Okay, I think I could have a whole webinar on this. But my short answer is the following. Vitrectomy is only one generation old. It was basically developed around mid-1980s. And before then, there was no method to remove or work on the vitreous. Before vitrectomy was invented, patients with bad types of retinal detachments simply went blind. We had no way to help them. Specifically, we're talking about patients with bad diabetic retinopathy and bad and other types of retinal detachments. So now we have this new procedure where some of the worst patients can be helped. And at least in the beginning, despite our best efforts, a vitrectomy was performed, but the patient still lost vision or went blind. And they went blind or lost vision because of the disease, not the operation. But unfortunately, the operation got branded as a high-risk operation. Number two, the 20 gauge system, which is still probably in use in probably half the country. As an aside, I would say probably less than 1/3 of all retina specialists in the United States work exclusively with 25 gauge, which is what I do. There's a lot of doctors that use the 20 gauge system. And the 20 gauge system, in theory, has a higher risk of creating tears because the instruments are bigger and the suction forces inside the eye are higher. So it's easier to create a retinal tear. Hold on one sec. So there was some risk to vitrectomy. Now with 25 gauge, in theory, the chance of not in theory, because the 25 gauge, the chance of getting a retinal tear is smaller because the instruments are thinner and they cannot generate the same forces to inadvertently suck on vitreous to cause a retinal tear. So I think, and the third reason so many doctors don't recommend it is there are so many doctors that do not recognize the benefits of the thinner gauge systems and basically how that translates to a safer operation and less chance of causing a retinal tear. So you've got a lot of doctors out there in practice who were just raised or educated in the era of vitrectomy is bad. So it's just been our stance that you don't do vitrectomy unless you've got retinal detachment, macular pucker, epiretinal membranes, blood in the eye, etc. But as many of you know, the statistics that I state with regard to safety, that being infection or retinal detachment, they're not my statistics. These are national statistics. And you're now talking about retina surgery, which is as safe or safer than cataract surgery. Okay, John, I think I already answered your question. I think you answered that twice. Yes, you did. AR, why do I induce PVD when others do not? From what I've read, this can increase oxygen perfusion from retina to lens and increase rate of cataract formation and also increase the risk of retinal breaks during the peel. Okay. The oxygen perfusion question is completely theoretical. We don't need, on two regards. We don't know for a fact that removing the vitreous actually changes that. In theory, it may, but we also don't know whether or not that's actually the culprit in cataract formation. It's been my observation with my own patients that it's just unlikely to happen while it can. Now, inducing a PVD does, in my opinion, increase the chance of causing a retinal tear or retinal break during the inducement or during the operation. And I think that's a risk that I generally will review with you. If you haven't had a PVD, it's something we should spend some time talking about, especially if you're really young. I would say that The chance of creating a tear varies from surgeon to surgeon. My own observations is you probably increase the chance of getting a tear in the retina to somewhere around 5%, which is still pretty low. DA asks, have you ever had a patient that blindness occurred? In 23 years, I've had one patient who lost significant vision, presumably from infection, although we couldn't really ever figure that out, but not complete blindness. And then I had a second patient about 2 years ago who had some complications where there was loss of vision, but we could not figure out exactly the mechanism. There may have been some weird toxicity, or there may have been some problem with his or her pushing on the eye, but it's a very, very rare event. And in 23 years, I've probably done somewhere in the order of 10, 15, 20,000 vitrectomies, not only for floaters, but for all reasons. FNS, how long should you wait before doing vitrectomy on the second eye? I generally like to wait 2 or 3 months. I want to make absolutely sure that you haven't had any complications in the first eye, such as, well, the big one I worry about is retinal detachment. I have on occasion done it a little bit sooner. I've had a couple international patients that stayed for a short while, but if it's up to me, I'd like to wait 2 to 3 months. I just think it's safer. AWS. Hi, Dr. Wong. Thank you so much for the webinar. You're welcome. Do you think 27 gauge vitrectomy is safer than 25 gauge, especially as more eye specialists start using it? This is a really good question. I've tried 27 gauge, and I'm not so sure I'm going to migrate to it anytime soon. My hesitations are the following. While I agree in theory that 27 gauge vitrectomy might be safer than 25, that would be with regard to causing a retinal tear. However, I am not impressed with what seems to be an increase in speed of the operation. And I do believe that the longer you take to do something, the increased chances are for having complications. So I'm a little, it's kind of a, it's a, it's plus, you have to weigh your options and figure out overall what's best for you and the patient. I think 25 gauge compared to 20 gauge, it was a huge game changer. Going to 27 gauge for me, the only added value would be, in theory anyway, less chance of having no pressure in the eye the next day. But I've already said that we spend 2 minutes putting sutures in. It kind of obviates the 27 gauge. Number two, 27 gauge is not, I'm not so sure it's even available. That is, I believe as doctors and hospitals, we can order it. I think Alcon's having difficulties keeping up with their 25 gauge systems as far as my sales rep let me know in February and March. So it's not really widely used. And the last issue is there have been issues with software with new systems being introduced. There was for some of you that have really done your research, there was a recall on one of the companies on one of the 25 gauge systems that was marketed several years ago. So even if it were out there and everybody else was using it, I think I'd be waiting a good year or so just to make sure at the very least that the machines and the new instrumentation was working as expected. JS says, thank you, Randy, for doing this. You're welcome. I'm wondering about inducing PVD. I am 27 and have watched a previous webinar of yours. I also have 2 questions. Okay. I'm going to go in order. So JS, I'll get back to your questions in a second because I think you didn't ask them just yet. We're going to go to DB. I've already had cataract surgery on both eyes. I had a torn retina and vitrectomy in the left eye 4 years ago, and now have mounted floaters in the right eye. Considering vitrectomy to remove. Is there risk to the left eye with this procedure, as I do not want to cause more trauma to the left eye? I've been told can do the surgery when I'm ready. I would agree. If what all you're asking is the right eye safe to have the floaters? And I would say, yes, it is. It should not bother the left eye at all, the eye which had the previous retinal detachment. Okay, JS. I'm wondering if you now induce PVD in all your patients. Second, if a person were to get an infection, would you know how about hours later, or how long does it take you to know you are clear of any infection? I prefer PVD in all my patients, as I said. Number two, if a person were to get an infection, we generally know about it within about 48, 72 hours. There are rare occasions where there are suspected cases of infection inside the eye. Weeks later, those are usually in cataract surgery. It is possible that on the first morning we could tell there's an infection. They usually are pretty aggressive and occur rapidly. DA, can floaters make your vision dim, or could that be something else? It could be both. Probably I'd be concerned that it's something else. On occasion, I've seen patients with floaters that are so huge that they don't move relative to the macula because they're always in front of the macula, and patients complain of dimness. But I don't think, I'd be more concerned that maybe something else is going on, maybe like cataract or epiretinal membrane. MB, is there a chance that my vision will not get back to 20/20 after the vitrectomy? Yes, if you were to get an infection or retinal detachment, that may happen. But if in uncomplicated cases, I would expect your vision to return to exactly what it was the day we scheduled surgery. MB says, oh, this is another MB. I am 26 and had floaters occur after PRK eye correction surgery. Would this make the vitrectomy any riskier in my case? No, and I do not think the PRK caused the floaters. You may beg to differ, but this seems to be people get concerned about this quite often. I think more than likely you had the PRK because you're nearsighted, and nearsighted people can get a PVD sooner or floaters sooner. But regardless, to answer your question, would this make the vitrectomy any riskier in your case? No. AR, when do you think that 27 gauge instrumentation will be common? Will these show any advantage over 25 gauge in terms of safety or efficacy? I think I answered all that with AW. 27 gauge probably won't be common, meaning 51% of retina people using them. I would say probably at least for another 3 to 4 to 5 years. If there are 3,500 retina specialists in the United States, I think that's a reasonable estimate. I would say less than 1/3 of them have been using 25 gauge, and 25 gauge has probably been out for almost 10 years. So the penetration or the percentage of this technology is really being used by a minority of retina specialists. And I know this from talking to our sales reps. MG, what do you mean by young in terms of need for sutures? 20s, 30s? Yeah, every year that number changes for me. Definitely if you're in your 20s, definitely if you are in your 30s. If you're in your 40s, probably it's negotiable. But definitely in 50s, 60s, or 70s, I don't think we would need to worry about it. FN, what do you fill the eye with during vitrectomy? Does your eye tend to be more sensitive to eye traumas after surgery? Remember, it's a 3-port vitrectomy system. 1 port for my hand, 1 port for my other hand, and the 3rd port port for a tube which infuses saline into the eye. So we fill the eye with saline, artificial saline, and that is replaced by your own natural saline within 24 to 48 hours. I don't really understand your question about trauma, but I don't think the vitrectomy in any way causes your eye to be more sensitive to trauma after the surgery. JH says, thank you for answering my questions. You're welcome. And I would say thank you for attending. You are wonderful and wouldn't hesitate to come to see you. I appreciate that. The surgeon who finally has restored me is very familiar to your training, so I know you're one of the best trained. Well, you're very kind. Have a wonderful weekend. Hey, John, JH, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. This is from Chrissy, and Chrissy would like me to convey to you that medical insurance, tell everyone that most U.S. PPO policies do cover vitrectomy. Yeah, that's very important. As long as the patient reports that the floaters are affecting their everyday life. It is not like cosmetics. It is not like cosmetic surgery. Basically, bad floaters equal coverage to remove them. HMO policies, though, are different. You can talk to her directly about how to handle your insurance if you've got an HMO. Thanks, Chrissy. How do you MBS? How do you induce a PVD? I've got a video on my YouTube channel. If you would Google just Wong, or not Google, if you search on YouTube something like induce PVD and then my last name, Wong, W-O-N-G, you should be able to get a video where I've injected Kenalog, which is this white powdery material, into the vitreous, and that lets you see the vitreous pull away from the surface of the retina. And we basically use straight suction from the vitrectomy instrument.